Wyoming Territory, 1882. The vast wilderness spread like an unforgiving sea around the Laramie Mountains, a place where men lived and died by nature's harsh rules. Yeager Raines knew these rules better than most. At 25, his lean frame and sun-weathered face told the story of 7 hard years working cattle across the untamed range. Though handsome with deep green eyes that mirrored the pine forests and a strong jaw often covered with light stubble, Yeager kept to himself. He believed the frontier demanded solitude. Connection only made a man vulnerable, and vulnerability got men killed. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and enough sense to stay breathing. Yeager often muttered to his loyal paint stallion, Thunder. He'd seen too many good men fall to the land's harshness or to bullets from those who wanted what others had built. His parents' small ranch had been taken by men with greed in their hearts and guns in their hands when he was just 18, leaving him orphaned and convinced that attachment was weakness. The Rising Moon Ranch, where he worked as foreman, sprawled across 30,000 acres of prime grazing land. The owner, an aging cattleman named Henry Lawson, trusted Yeager completely, which suited him fine. Trust in business was necessary. Trust in matters of the heart was foolishness. What Yeager thought he wanted was simple: earn enough to buy his own spread someday, far from others, where he could live by his own code. What he needed, though he would have denied it fiercely, was to heal the wound of loss that kept him from truly living. Spring roundup had just finished, and Yeager was leading 3 of the hands back to the ranch headquarters when the afternoon sky darkened ominously. Wyoming springs were unpredictable, with snow possible even in May. "Storm's coming fast," said Colton, the youngest hand. "We should find shelter." "There's that old line shack about 3 miles east," Yeager replied, eyeing the blackening clouds. "We'll weather it there." They had just reached the dilapidated cabin when the storm hit with unexpected fury. Rain turned to hail, pounding the earth with stones the size of marbles. Thunder crashed overhead as they secured the horses and pushed into the shelter. "Wait," Yeager said, raising his hand for silence as they entered. "Someone's here." The figure huddled in the corner startled at their entrance, scrambling backward until hitting the wall. Wide blue eyes stared out from a dirt-smudged face, blonde hair falling in tangled disarray around slim shoulders. It was a young woman, dressed in what had once been a fine traveling suit of dark blue wool, now torn and muddied. She clutched a small carpet bag protectively. "Please," she said, her voice quavering but with determination beneath. "I mean no harm." Yeager approached slowly, hands visible. "Neither do we, miss. Just seeking shelter from the storm." He studied her face. She couldn't be more than 20, with delicate features and a refined accent that marked her as Eastern. "You're a long way from anywhere. How'd you end up here?" She straightened, gathering dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "My name is Nora Prescott. I'm 20 years old, from Boston. I was traveling to meet my uncle in Cheyenne when our stagecoach was robbed yesterday. The driver was killed, and the other passengers fled. I became lost trying to find the road." Yeager's brow furrowed. "You've been out here alone for a day?" He glanced at her torn clothes and the scratches on her hands. "You're lucky to be alive." "I'm perfectly aware of that, Mr. Raines." "Yeager Raines." "Mr. Raines," she continued, lifting her chin. "I may be from the city, but I'm not without resources. I found water and this shelter. I would have found my way eventually." Something in her stubborn pride struck Yeager. Here was a city woman completely out of her element, yet refusing to surrender to fear. It contradicted everything he believed about city folk, especially women. "The nearest town is Medicine Bow, 20 miles west," Yeager said. "We can take you there once the storm passes." Nora nodded gratefully, but her eyes held suspicion. "Thank you." As the storm raged through the night, Yeager found himself watching Nora Prescott. She accepted their offered jerky and coffee without complaint, though he could tell neither was to her liking. When Colton mentioned Indians in the area, he noticed her knuckles whiten, but her expression remained composed. This wasn't the helpless Eastern belle he'd expected. By morning, the storm had passed, but Yeager's world had shifted. For the first time in years, he felt responsible for someone beyond himself. It unsettled him. "We'll need to bring her to the ranch first," he told the men as they prepared the horses. "She needs proper food and rest before traveling to town." "I can't hear you," Nora said, approaching with her bag. And while I appreciate your concern, I need to reach Cheyenne as quickly as possible. My uncle will be worried. Yeager frowned. Miss Prescott, you're in no condition for more hard travel. The ranch is only 4 hours' ride. We can send word to your uncle from there. Her blue eyes flashed. I am not some delicate flower that will wilt at the first challenge, Mr. Raines. Despite himself, Yeager smiled. I'm beginning to see that. The ride to Rising Moon Ranch revealed more about Nora than she perhaps intended. Though obviously sore and tired, she asked intelligent questions about the land, the cattle business, and Wyoming Territory. Her blonde hair, now tied back neatly, caught the sunlight, and Yeager found himself watching how she adapted her posture to the unfamiliar rhythm of horseback. Have you always been a cowboy? She asked as they rode side by side. My father had a small ranch near Laramie. After he and my mother were killed, I started working other men's cattle. I'm sorry, she said simply. It was 7 years ago. That doesn't mean it stopped hurting. Her perception made him uncomfortable. Why were you coming to Wyoming? Nora hesitated. My parents died last winter, influenza. Uncle Gilbert is my only family now. He owns a store in Cheyenne. She looked across the rolling landscape. I never imagined a place so vast and empty. It's not empty, Yeager corrected. It's just filled with different things than Boston. When they arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Lawson, the owner's wife, immediately took Nora under her wing, providing clean clothes, a hot bath, and a proper meal. Yeager found himself relieved to see color return to Nora's cheeks as she sat at the dinner table that evening, now dressed in a borrowed calico dress that complemented her slender figure. Miss Prescott was telling us about her journey west, Henry Lawson said. Quite an ordeal. Uncle Gilbert wanted me to wait until he could escort me, Nora admitted. But the family lawyer said the inheritance paperwork couldn't wait. She paused at the curious looks. My father left me a modest sum, but there were complications with the transfer to Wyoming Territory banks. Well, you're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered, Mrs. Lawson offered. That's very kind, but I should continue to Cheyenne tomorrow, Nora insisted. The stage doesn't come through for 3 days, Yeager found himself saying. And it's 60 miles to Cheyenne. Too far to send one of the hands just for escort duty when we're shorthanded for spring. Henry nodded agreement. Yeager's right. Stage is your best option. Yeager caught the flash of frustration in Nora's eyes, but also resignation. She was practical enough to recognize the reality of her situation. Over the next 3 days, Yeager tried to focus on ranch work, but his attention continually drifted to the Boston woman. He found Nora walking the grounds, asking questions about ranch operations, and even observing the breaking of a spirited colt. When she appeared at dinner each night, he noticed new details, the graceful way she held herself, how the setting sun made her hair look like spun gold, the surprising laugh that emerged when one of the hands told an amusing story. On her second day, he discovered her at the corral fence, watching him work with a young horse. You're very good with them, she observed. You seem to understand what they're thinking. Horses are honest creatures, he replied. They tell you exactly what they're feeling if you pay attention. Unlike people, she asked perceptively. Yeager glanced at her. People have agendas. Horses just want fair treatment and clear expectations. That sounds like what most people want too, Mr. Raines. The afternoon before the stage was due, Yeager found Nora attempting to saddle a gentle mare. What are you doing? He asked, striding toward her. Mrs. Lawson mentioned a beautiful view by the creek. I thought I'd ride out to see it before leaving tomorrow. Yeager adjusted the saddle she'd nearly secured. You shouldn't go alone. I've been watching how everyone does things. I'm a quick study. Quick study or not, there are rattlesnakes, sudden weather changes, and you could still get lost. Nora sighed. Then accompany me, Mr. Raines, if you're so concerned. He should have refused. Instead, 20 minutes later, they were riding across the ranch's eastern pasture, spring wildflowers dotting the green landscape. The creek meandered through a small valley, cottonwoods providing shade along its banks. It was indeed a beautiful spot, one Yeager seldom took time to appreciate. He watched as Nora dismounted gracefully and walked to the water's edge. It's nothing like Boston, she said, yet I find I'm drawn to this openness. There's a freedom here I never experienced at home. Freedom comes with danger, Yeager reminded her. Nora turned to face him, the afternoon sun highlighting the golden strands in her hair. Perhaps that's what makes it valuable. She studied him. You've built walls higher than most stockades, Mr. Raines. What are you protecting yourself from? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Out here, walls keep you alive. Or they keep you from living. She stepped closer. I lost my parents too. I understand wanting to prevent more pain. Something about her presence made Yeager uncomfortable, not in an unpleasant way, but in the manner of a man who realizes his defenses are being questioned. We should head back. Storm clouds are building. That evening, a telegram arrived for Nora. Her face paled as she read it. Is everything all right? Mrs. Lawson asked. It's my uncle, Nora said, her voice strained. He's fallen ill and can't meet me. He suggests I return to Boston. Without even seeing him, Yeager found himself asking. Nora's eyes met his, troubled. The message says his condition is contagious. He doesn't want to risk my health. Something about the situation struck Yeager as wrong. May I see the telegram? After a moment's hesitation, Nora handed it to him. The message was brief, gravely ill with fever. Too dangerous for you. Return east immediately. Gilbert. This doesn't sound like a concerned uncle, Yeager said slowly. It sounds like someone who doesn't want you in Cheyenne. What are you suggesting? I'm not sure, but something doesn't fit. You said you came about an inheritance. Could anyone benefit from you not claiming it? Nora's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Uncle Gilbert's business partner, Mr. Vaughn. He's been managing my father's investments here. The letter from our family lawyer suggested irregularities. The next morning, instead of putting Nora on the eastbound stage, Yeager saddled 2 horses. Mr. Lawson has agreed to spare me for a few days, he explained to her surprised face. We're going to Cheyenne to find your uncle. Why would you do this? She asked as they rode away from the ranch. Yeager considered his answer carefully. Because something's wrong, and I can't send you into danger alone. I thought connection was weakness on the frontier, she said with unexpected insight. Maybe I'm rethinking some things. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days, during which Yeager found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. He told Nora about his dream of rebuilding his father's ranch someday, about the beauty of Wyoming winters, about the satisfaction of work that connected a person to the land. In turn, she spoke of Boston society's stifling expectations, her love of literature, and her hope to find a place where she truly belonged. I never felt at home in drawing rooms discussing who married whom, she confessed as they camped the first night. My mother despaired of my preference for books over balls. You seem to be adapting well to the West, Yeager observed, noticing how she helped set up camp without complaint. Perhaps I was born in the wrong place, she said with a smile that made something shift in Yeager's chest. When they reached Cheyenne, they found Prescott's General Goods on the main street. A bell jingled as they entered, and a thin man with spectacles looked up from the counter. May I help you? I'm looking for Gilbert Prescott, Nora said. I'm his niece, Nora. The man's eyes widened. Miss Prescott, we've been worried sick. Your uncle's been searching for you since word came about the stagecoach robbery. Searching? But he sent a telegram saying he was ill. The confusion was cleared moments later when a robust, white-haired man emerged from the back room, letting out a cry of relief at the sight of Nora. My dear girl, thank God you're safe. He embraced her tightly. After explanations were exchanged, Gilbert's expression darkened. I never sent any telegram, but I fear I know who did. He looked at Yeager. Thank you for bringing my niece safely, Mr. Raines. I'm in your debt. What's happening, Uncle? Nora asked. Gilbert sighed heavily. I believe Vernon Vaughn has been embezzling from your father's accounts. When your lawyer wrote that you were coming with authorization to examine the books, Vernon disappeared, along with a significant sum of money. The stagecoach robbery, Yeager said, understanding dawning. It wasn't random. Gilbert nodded grimly. I suspect he arranged it, hoping to scare you away, or worse. That evening, as they dined in Gilbert's comfortable home above the store, Yeager found himself watching Nora. Despite the shocking revelations, she maintained her composure, asking clear-headed questions about the financial situation and legal options. The sheriff believes Vernon has fled to Denver, Gilbert explained. They've telegraphed the authorities there. What will you do now? Yeager asked Nora as Gilbert excused himself to retrieve some documents. She met his gaze steadily. Stay and help Uncle Gilbert rebuild. This is my legacy too. Something tightened in Yeager's chest. He'd come to admire this woman's strength, her adaptability, her clear-eyed view of the world. The thought of saying goodbye unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Wyoming's a hard place, he said, testing her resolve. So was Boston, in different ways. She smiled. At least here the dangers are honest. The next morning, Yeager prepared to return to the ranch. His duty was done. Nora was safely with her uncle, and the mystery of the telegram was solved. This was the natural conclusion to their brief acquaintance. So why did it feel unfinished? You've done more than anyone could have expected, Nora said as they stood outside the store. I don't know how to thank you. No need, he replied stiffly. I'm glad things worked out. She studied his face. Will you visit if you're in Cheyenne again? It's not often I make it to town. Something like disappointment crossed her features. I understand. You have your life at Rising Moon. Yeager nodded, tipped his hat, and mounted Thunder. He'd ridden barely 3 miles when he pulled up short. What was he doing? For the first time in years, he'd met someone who saw through his walls, who understood loss but chose to keep living anyway, who adapted to hardship with grace. And he was riding away. His return to the ranch was quiet. He threw himself into work, staying longer hours in the saddle, taking the most demanding tasks. But at night, thoughts of Nora intruded. Her laugh, her perceptive questions, the way sunrise caught in her hair. 2 weeks passed before Henry Lawson called him to the main house. Got a telegram from Cheyenne, the rancher said, handing Yeager a paper. Thought you'd want to see it. The message was brief. Vernon Vaughn captured in Denver. Trial set. Evidence of stagecoach conspiracy confirmed. Gilbert and Nora Prescott. Relief washed through him. At least she was safe. You know, Henry said casually, I need someone to go to Cheyenne for supplies next week. Emma wants special fabric for curtains that can only be found there. Yeager looked up to find the older man watching him with knowing eyes. I can send someone else, Henry continued, but I thought you might volunteer. A week later, Yeager stood outside Prescott's General Goods, his heart pounding uncomfortably. He hadn't telegraphed ahead. What if Nora wasn't interested in seeing him? What if she'd already met someone in Cheyenne? The bell jingled as he entered. She was behind the counter, helping a customer select fabric. Her blonde hair was swept up neatly, and she wore a practical blue dress that matched her eyes. When she looked up and saw him, the smile that bloomed across her face told him everything he needed to know. Yeager, she exclaimed when the customer left. What brings you to Cheyenne? Supplies, he said, then added more honestly. And I wanted to make sure you were all right after the news about Vaughn. We're relieved he's facing justice. She came around the counter. Uncle Gilbert is at the bank, but he'll be sorry to have missed you. Actually, Yeager said, gathering his courage, it's you I came to see. They walked through Cheyenne that afternoon, Nora pointing out changes she'd already helped implement at the store, Yeager sharing news from the ranch. It felt natural, as if the connection forged during their journey had never broken. Will you stay for supper? She asked as afternoon waned. Uncle would love to thank you properly. I'd like that, Yeager said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Over the next 6 months, Yeager found reasons to visit Cheyenne with increasing frequency. Henry Lawson, far from objecting, seemed amused by his foreman's sudden interest in town business. Each visit deepened Yeager's understanding of Nora. He watched her build a life in Wyoming, adapting Eastern business knowledge to Western realities, forming friendships with townspeople, and maintaining her independence while honoring her uncle's guidance. In turn, she drew Yeager out of his solitude. She listened to his dreams of having his own ranch again, challenged his more cynical views, and introduced him to friends who expanded his world beyond cattle and horses. You're different, Colton observed after Yeager's return from an October visit to Cheyenne. More? I don't know, present. Yeager couldn't deny it. The wall he'd built after his parents' deaths was crumbling, and he found himself less afraid of its collapse than he'd expected. During a November visit, as they walked along the partially frozen Crow Creek, Nora slipped on ice. Yeager caught her, and for a moment, they stood close, her gloved hands gripping his coat. I've been thinking, she said, her breath visible in the cold air. Uncle Gilbert wants to expand the store, open a second location in Laramie. That's ambitious, Yeager replied, still holding her arms. He suggested I might manage it. Her blue eyes held his. It would mean leaving Cheyenne. Yeager's heart quickened. Laramie's much closer to Rising Moon than Cheyenne. I know. A smile played at her lips. That factored into my decision to accept. Winter came harsh and early that year. Deep snow isolated the ranch for weeks, preventing Yeager from traveling to either Cheyenne or Laramie, where Nora had moved in December to prepare the new store. Letters came sporadically with supply wagons, but they were a poor substitute for seeing her. In February, during a break in the weather, Henry called Yeager into his study. "Emma and I have been talking," the rancher said. "We're getting older, and this place is becoming too much for us to manage." Yeager frowned. "If you're worried about the operation, I can take on more." "That's not it," Henry interrupted. "We want to sell the ranch." The news hit Yeager like a physical blow. Rising Moon had been his home for 5 years. "I understand," he said stiffly. "I'll start looking for other work when the weather clears." "Hold on," Henry said, raising his hand. "We're offering it to you first." Yeager stared. "Sir, not the whole spread. We know that's beyond your means. But the east section, about 5,000 acres including the creek valley you're fond of, and 1,000 head of cattle. Emma and I will keep the main house and a small parcel for our retirement." "I can't afford." "We'll carry the note," Henry said firmly. 5 years at fair interest. "You've earned this chance, Yeager." That night, unable to sleep, Yeager wrote to Nora. The letter was longer than any he'd written before, explaining Henry's offer and his conflicted feelings about taking on such responsibility alone. The reply came 2 weeks later, brought by a rider from town. "Dear Yeager," Nora wrote, "your news is wonderful. This is the dream you've spoken of since I met you, the chance to rebuild what was lost. Of course it's frightening. All worthwhile things are. But remember what you told me about horses. They respond to confidence and clear direction. Perhaps life does too. P.S. The new store opens next month. I hope you'll be my first customer." March brought the first real thaw, and with it, Yeager's opportunity to ride to Laramie. The new Prescott's Mercantile stood proudly on a corner of 2nd Street, its fresh paint and large windows drawing attention from passers-by. When he entered, Nora was directing 2 clerks in arranging a display of spring goods. She wore a practical burgundy dress, her blonde hair now styled in a more Western fashion than when they'd first met. The months in Wyoming had given her confidence that showed in her straight posture and assured directions. She spotted him and broke into a radiant smile. "You came," said I would. He replied, suddenly shy after their months apart. After she finished with the clerks, they walked to a small cafe for lunch. Yeager found himself telling her about his decision to accept Henry's offer. "The papers are drawn up. Come spring roundup, I'll officially own East Rising Moon Ranch." Nora reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so proud of you. You're building something again, not just working for others." Her touch lingered, and Yeager turned his hand to hold hers properly. "I've been thinking about what that means, owning land again, having responsibilities that are truly mine. And it's made me realize how much I've changed since meeting you." He met her eyes. "The walls I built after my parents died. You helped me see they were a prison, not protection." Nora's expression softened. "You did the same for me. I came west thinking I just needed to secure my inheritance, but what I found was a place I truly belong." As April brought green back to the ranges, Yeager worked tirelessly preparing for the transition. He built a modest cabin on his soon-to-be property, planned improvements to corrals and fences, and hired 2 reliable hands to help with the operation. Each weekend, he rode to Laramie. Sometimes he and Nora simply walked together, discussing their respective businesses. Other times, they joined community gatherings or had dinner with Gilbert, who had come to visit the new store. On a perfect May evening, almost exactly a year after their first meeting, Yeager took Nora to the creek valley that would soon be the heart of his ranch. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," she said as they stood watching the sunset paint the water gold. "Nora," Yeager said, turning to face her, "when I found you in that lined shack, I thought I was just doing my duty, helping someone in trouble. I didn't realize you'd end up helping me more." She looked at him questioningly. "You showed me that being alone isn't strength. It's just being alone." He took her hands in his. "I don't want to build this ranch by myself. I want to build a life with you." Tears gathered in her blue eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Yeager Raines?" He nodded, suddenly finding words inadequate. "I love you, Nora. Will you marry me?" Her answer was to step forward and kiss him, her lips warm and certain against his. When they finally separated, she whispered, "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." They married in June, a simple ceremony attended by Gilbert, the Lawsons, and friends from both the ranch and Laramie. Nora wore a dress of cream-colored silk with wildflowers in her hair, and Yeager found himself wondering how he'd ever believed love was weakness when it made him feel more capable than he'd ever been. By their first anniversary, East Rising Moon Ranch was flourishing. The cabin had expanded into a proper house, and cattle grazed peacefully across the verdant hills. Nora had hired a manager for the Laramie store, allowing her to split her time between business and ranch life. On a warm evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Nora nestled against Yeager's side, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "Did I ever tell you," Yeager said, "that when I first found you, I thought you were completely lost?" Nora laughed softly. "I was." "No," he disagreed, kissing her hair. "You were exactly where you needed to be. We both were." As darkness settled over the Wyoming wilderness, Yeager Raines reflected on how wrong he'd been. The frontier wasn't a place where connection meant vulnerability and death. It was a place where finding the right person to stand beside you meant the difference between surviving and truly living. A city girl lost in the wild had found her way home, and in helping her, a cowboy had found his heart.